as long as there's one man, one woman with hope, faith, and the willingness to act, we can change the world.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast. It's a beautiful Friday afternoon, morning here in Las Vegas. And we've been quite busy, my wife and I, in the last week. We have a new puppy named Kiku, 9 weeks old. Beautiful, but a lot of work, but we're enjoying the heck out of her. So it's keeping us busy and out of trouble. Today it's a special podcast for me. I have the privilege of hosting a friend, a real dear friend. Actually, consider him family, but also someone who has interviewed me a million times. In the past. A lot of you in the industry, and I know this goes out to not just security industry, but a lot of you in the security industry know my guest, Ron Worman. Ron has his own wonderful podcast, Great Conversation podcast, which I was privileged to be on. Definitely encourage all of you to check it out and look at it, subscribe to it, as well as our podcast here. Hit that subscribe button. But when we talk about leadership, and when we talk about values, and when we talk about just being a decent human being who cares about family, country, the community, the world, Ron Worman, in my opinion, is the epitome of that. And so, Ron, welcome to the podcast. It's an honor to have you here. Thank you.
Well, first of all of you just imagine for a second where this man who's had this incredibly successful career, who's given back to his industry in so many different ways, a brand new author of leadership, Ronin, The Art of Leadership, would ask you to be on his podcast. I'm humbled by that, Mike, and I appreciate your kind words.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And as we were joking before we got on recording here that this is kind of role reversal, because Ron has had the privilege to interview me many, many times, mostly in the context of the Great Conversation, and they've been wonderful. So it's kind of nice now to kind of learn more about you and talk about you. So I guess to begin with, tell us something about your background, your upbringing. So where was the origin of Ron Worman?
Wow, and what a great question from a leader like you, Mike, because beginnings are important, right? The story of one's life that shapes you and makes you who you are, and I wish I could have been a fly on the wall watching me grow up. but I will tell you this, that this is interesting. I knew I was a little bit of an oddball different. Okay. I was the kind of kid. Remember World Books?
Yes. Oh, yeah. And we had it in our house too. Yeah.
That's right. So you'd find me in the room with a World Book, studying different historical figures. They also had a section around vocabulary, and very early on, I became a lifelong learner. I'll fast forward a little bit in my teen years. Imagine you're in the back seat of a car, like most of us did in high school, and you're going to the park to drink beer. Okay. And Ron's in the back seat. One of my other friends is driving. We're all together. And I start saying, do you even know who you are? And this is a good one. This is a good one. Shut up, Ron. We're going to go drink beer and have fun. Will you just be quiet?
Exactly.
And my kids, fast forward, have done the same thing. One of my girls, I have 3 girls, turned to me one day and said, Dad, can you have a normal conversation? Can you just have a normal conversation? And of course, using the term you just used, no, I love great conversations. I only have a little bit of time here on this planet. And so early on, I wanted to be either one of two things, Mike. I wanted to be an all-star baseball player.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be, or I wanted to be a great author in the tradition of the great journalists like Ernest Hemingway. I want to go out and report on the world and write about it, right? And so I imagine that. And I think a lot of us, even though we can't articulate it, we start by getting stories read to us, and then we read stories. And I bet you did this too, Mike, where you start imagining you're the character in the novel, or you're the famous figure in history. And then you begin to create your own story. And it's kind of interesting to act as a third person going, oh, that's interesting. That's a good story. So you end up in this third person kind of category. And then you wake up one day, if you're lucky, you wake up and realize maybe it's not my story.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in a weird way, it's the guy who created me's story that's being channeled through me. And that's the journey of my life. I ended up getting a journalism scholarship because I was a writer on the paper in high school.
Okay.
And in my first semester of college, Mike, I ended up giving up my scholarship. You ready for this? So remember, I'm a freshman, and and this professor had put a placard on the wall. Said, I'm taking juniors and seniors to Greece to study the culture of Greece, the language of Greece, the history of Greece, and also anthropology of Greece, right? Under the great Dorothy Lee. And if you saw me on video right now, Mike sees me putting little exclamation, little apostrophe, because I didn't know who Dorothy Lee was. I didn't even know what anthropology was. So here I am trying to convince this guy, this professor, to take me. And he said, well, that'd be really interesting. Are you a junior? Because I'm interviewing him for the paper. And I go, no. He goes, are you a sophomore? He goes, you're kidding me. You're a first semester freshman. The answer is an absolute no. You can't go. And I asked him why. And this gives you a little sense of me, Mike.
Yeah.
He said, because you'd fail. It'd be upper level courses. You haven't even had the beginning courses yet, and you'd fail. And I asked him this key question. And I think you'll appreciate it as a leadership guru. Who's responsible for my success or failure? And the answer is me.
Yep.
And I lobbied hard for the rest of the semester, all the way up to the dean of the college. And I ended up in Greece in January. And Mike, I had never been out of the country. But now I'm Ernest Hemingway. I'm in Greece, right?
All right. Very persistent.
And it's going to go on for about 4 months, studying in Athens, but also he took us all over Greece, and we're studying all sorts of things. And I have in the back of my mind that, shoot, I'm already in Greece after the semester's over. Why don't I just get on a Eurail pass through Europe? And a senior came up to me and said, you're kidding me, right? He goes, that's a Disneyland ride. That'll always be there. Why don't you go on a different kind of ride? What kind of ride do you want me to go on? He goes, we're going to go from Greece overland through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, to the Taj Mahal and back. Overland, because we have no money. We're going to travel like the natives, and we're going to see a part of the world that will change forever. Now, Mike, this is 1974. You know your history.
Right.
The Russians have not invaded Afghanistan yet. The Shah of Iran has not been deposed. Indira Gandhi is still thinking about blowing up a nuclear bomb to prove to the world that she's a nuclear power. And of course, we didn't like that in America, somewhat like we don't like the Koreans or the Iranians having nuclear power right now, right? We suspected India would not be a good place to have a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
And suffice it to say, they were very prescient. We ended up seeing things we would never be able to see again in this day and age. And so we traveled all the way over to India and back. I got dysentery. I was a high school athlete, so losing 20 pounds was a lot of muscle because I didn't have a lot of fat. And I got dysentery, didn't even know what it was. And,
wow.
and I ended up in a bus accident in the middle of, on the way home in the middle of Turkey, in the middle of nowhere, that almost killed us. I actually, I head on these roads are single file roads.
Sure.
And these Mercedes trucks dressed up in, you know, all sorts of filigree and all sorts of overloaded storage would come at each other. So the bus is going toward this big Mercedes bus early in the morning. And we had just stopped. We had just stopped to take a break early in the morning. And the guy has his sunglasses on. And I'm thinking, Mike, oh my gosh, he has sunglasses on. It's not even sunrise yet. And the bottom line is, it was a head-on accident. We were in the back of the bus, and I wake up looking at my friend and didn't realize till a few minutes later that we were at the front of the bus.
Ooh-wee.
Oh, yeah. So we almost died. Okay. Why do I bring that journey up? The stories I got out of that was amazing, but the most important story was I didn't know anything. I was a United States white Anglo-Saxon lower middle class kid, never traveled outside of America. America the Great, you know, we're an enlightened country, had no idea what the rest of the world looked like. And I discovered the world. And that gave me an intelligence that became very valuable much later. It turned me on to travel. So I ended up, here I am without a scholarship now. The professor who gave me that scholarship ends up giving me a scholarship to study the Northwest Coast Indians. And Mike, that's where I first discovered Seattle, because I took an all-night bus ride up to and ended up at Lake Union. And we took a 52-foot stinker through the Inland Passage when there were no cruise boats. This is 1974. And that's where I realized salmon didn't come in a can.
Yeah.
So now I'm reaching out to indigenous cultures. Interesting.
Yeah.
Went back to school for a year and then traveled the Europe adventure, and worked my way through Europe for an entire year. And then went back to school for a year, and then decided, because I met a horseman, a guy who loved horses, knew horses, and he had found out I had been to Afghanistan. And he said, you realize the ancient breed of horse that Genghis Khan once rode is in Afghanistan. Why don't we ride horses in the Hindu Kush? And I went, do you even know what you're talking about? Right. And bottom line is, we ended up going back through that same journey I did in 1974. Okay. It's now 77. If you get your dates ready for this.
Things have changed a little. Yeah.
And the coup has already happened. So the monarchy is trying to be now a dictatorship in Afghanistan. And we're still a year away from the Russians invading. We don't know any of that's going on behind the scenes. And we hit the border, Herat, the border between Turkey and Afghanistan. And Herat is where we ditched all our Western clothing, ended up dressing as one of the ethnic tribes, Pashtuns, which are known as Taliban a lot these days. And so I'm walking around Afghanistan now in a turban, dressed as a Pashtun. We travel down to the desert of death, Kandahar, and then back up to Kabul, then take a circuitous road up to Bamiyan, where one of the wonders of the world were. And this is where ancient monks carved in rock big Buddhas in the mountain that later would be desecrated and no longer exist.
Right.
And from Bamiyan, we bought horses and ended up riding in the Hindu Kush. Didn't get very far because, quite frankly, we didn't realize how primitive it was. Right. So it was crazy. But that center of influence there is still there and is still one of the major roundabouts, if you will, of the ancient Silk Road from China, connecting China, India, and Afghanistan. What did I learn on that journey? I learned there are no such things in that part of the world as nation states. So when George W. went into Afghanistan, I said, you know, it's not Afghanistan. It's 4 ethnic tribes, and those tribes have multiple tribes within the tribes. And we're not going to invade a country and take over. It's just not going to happen. And we're in for a bloody, bloody time, right?
Right.
And that was because I had been there. I had worked with these people. I had traveled with these people. I knew what made them tick. And so then I came back, ended up graduating, and my first job was in high tech. So here's what I learned about going into the business world when I decided I couldn't be a writer anymore if I was going to actually pay for rent, pay for a telephone, pay for electricity, take care of my health care for my kids. I wasn't going to be the starving author. And by the way, I had a midlife crisis over that because I gave up my dream, right?
Sure.
But actually I didn't. And you just underlined that a few minutes ago. I ended up writing the stories of others, but through business, not through the adventures, right? And who knows, I may still write that book one of these days. But here's the key, Mike. Throughout my business journey, I couldn't remember, these are people who went to school for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Got a picket, bought a house, got a picket fence, a dog. And I'm always feeling a little out of sorts that they're just working. And I started realizing that, as the great philosopher Thoreau said, most of these people are living lives of quiet desperation. They don't really have a purpose. They don't even know what their core values are. They don't know what they would die for, Mike. Does that resonate with you? They don't know what they would die for.
Absolutely.
And so I've been on a journey ever since to discover that through what I would later call a great conversation. And that's why you and I connected in such a powerful way, because I believe you're a brother in that journey.
Yeah. Wow. For those of you listening, this is fascinating stuff here. I mean, Ron's journey, obviously, your journey is very unusual, but you're definitely a risk taker, going into those places, right? I was in the CIA, went into a lot of different places, but I didn't have the experience you had, and going back twice, which I think is awesome. Where were you? We should have just recruited you. You could have been working for the agency, right?
Well, I don't know if you remember one of the first times we did meet and I found out you were ex-agency. I said to you, Mike, I'm just going to come clean with you because I'm sure you'll do a background on me without me knowing it. You're going to find pictures of me dressed as Taliban.
Okay? Yes, I do remember that. But you know what, man, this is so good because there are a lot of things in our lives that define who we are, right? Lead us to this, whatever journey we're on. You hit the nail on the head when you said, with all the stuff that you went through, especially getting out of being American-centric, US-centric, thinking about the world in a different way, actually talking to different people, you came back with a set of values, obviously radically different than I think a lot of the people you started working with in the business world. When it comes to those values, what are your core values? I think I know because I know you well enough, but I want our audience to know what are your core values, because I think it's important.
I sure hope I don't bore you or the audience, because one of the things I didn't tell you is after I entered the marketplace, I entered at a very interesting time because it was still IBM computers. And the guy who actually sent people to the moon and built fighter aircraft for the military and commercial aircraft was one of the first ones to use IBM computers. His name was Mr. McDonnell of McDonnell Douglas. And Mr. McDonnell did what Bezos did. he looked around and said, no one knows how to run these things. No one can afford them. You can't find skill sets out there. You can't find apps on them. Why don't I sell time in my data centers for people who want to start using computing? Now, he needed a team. This is the heart of a value proposition, by the way. All of you who run a business, listen to this. He said, what I want you to do, Ron and our team, is I want you to earn the trust of the CEO and the executive team to study how their people perform roles in a measurable process using whatever tools they had been given to produce outcomes that matter. And if you can study that, Mr. McDonald said, you'll find where the gaps are. You'll find a lack of velocity. I would later apply that same principle to computer-aided design, and talking to the VP of engineering for Apple. And I said, you don't want to buy computer-aided design. What you want to buy is time to market. Because right now you have too many iterations between manufacturing and design. So what I was able to do is I got my MBA through McDonnell Douglas. I was able to understand the heart of a value proposition, which could feed a business model, which could feed a strategy for creating a valuable company. So I just wanted to put that out there, because now I'm going to share with you, again, after many years in business, I came to this. Remember, I said most people live lives of quiet desperation. Most people don't know what they would die for. Most people lack a purpose. If you study CEOs, them articulating what they believe their biggest problem was, is engagement with their employees, getting them engaged. And now what do we have? The big quit, the great resignation. People aren't engaged. And they also have a warped sense of work. They think work is something you do, not something you breathe. Now, if you catch that, here's my core values. When one of my first startups, I did 3, went public, and for a time I was worth a lot of money on paper. I was still working 80 hours a week, but I decided to go to seminary. And I never can do things the way professors or my bosses wanted me to do. I always was weird that way. I had to do something different. And
I'm getting a sense of that.
he wanted us to study Genesis. And I said, the thing we've never been taught. We've always been taught what happened after they screwed up.
Yeah.
It's everything we hear about is how we screwed up. Can you imagine raising a kid that way? Yeah, we're going to define your whole life by the one thing you screwed up, right? So I wrote a story about what happened before that. Why was I created? So what I was searching for, here's my core values, was identity. Who am I? Why am I here? And when I die, what do I leave behind? That, in a nutshell, is my value system, and everything flows out of it, Mike. Everything. The way I've led employees, the way I work with my customers on strategy and purpose. What happens if I don't have identity? How can I go to my people unless I know my own identity? Right. So and I have a lot of stripes on my back, Mike, because I'm not perfect. I have more wounds on my back from screwing up than I have victories. But that's my core value.
That's beautiful. I mean, I have never heard a talk on values kind of proposed that way. It's like, who am I? What's my purpose here? And what am I going to leave behind? Right. And that's really leadership. And I'm with you. I mean, if you can't be a truly great leader like you are, if you don't have those stripes, and if you don't make mistakes, and if you don't learn from them. But I think you're right. There are too many so-called leaders that it's all about me, right? It's about what's in it for me. What can I do? And you hit the nail on the head with the great resignation. We've heard it before. People don't leave companies. They leave their bosses. They leave that kind of environment, hostile environment, or something that they don't get any gratification on. And just think if people in charge of other people would just think about what you were just saying, right? Who am I? What's my identity? What's my purpose here? Is it to just make money, get that title, VP, president, blah, blah, blah? Or is it to serve others, to make sure that you're developing others and bringing them up? And then what's the legacy? What do you leave behind, right?
And imagine, I love that word, by the way. Imagine for a second we could teach, and by the way, there's good science behind this. If you follow Gallup, which studies human behavior and engagement, good science behind this. But let's dumb it down. When's the last time you went to one of your key employees? Forget one of your key, every employee. Do you have a moment in time where, without saying it this way, you make sure you understand where they fit on the spectrum of knowing why they're here? I mean, what a great conversation. I think we're shy about having those conversations. And notice I didn't say anything about religion.
Right.
It has nothing to do with formal religion. This is about identity. Oh my gosh. And I think that would be one of the greatest gifts a leader could give.
Yeah, I agree. We're both men of faith. And whether you are or not, what Ron is saying right here is just what you're saying. It's wonderful. So I remember having discussions with my direct reports, but I wouldn't put it that way, but you wanted to get to know them. You wanted to understand that they had a sense of worth and purpose in your organization, and that what they did actually would leave a legacy for their organization, for our organization, right? Put it in different terms, but you have to be vulnerable in the same way when you're right.
No, absolutely. It's interesting. The Security Industry Association, I believe you led that organization for a while. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, so what I was on the board of directors for SIA. I was the first end user that they invited on the board. I ran ISMA, and I ran the CSO roundtable, as they call it at the time, at the same time. But I was privileged to be on the SIA board.
Well, what's cool is, remember what I said about leaving behind, and sometimes you don't even recognize the influence you had. Here we are years later, and they've started a next gen mentorship program, right?
Awesome.
And
awesome.
Which I signed up for. So if you were a fly on the wall, you would have, it went for 10 weeks, by the way. So I'm going to take one piece of that conversation. And I said to this young man, I said, what if I told you that you don't have to scheme, you don't have to politic, you don't have to sacrifice your core values to get everything you need? Notice I didn't say want.
Right.
Need. And I said, yes, I had to give him a biblical passage later. And I said, this isn't because I'm any particular faith. It's just wisdom in this one line, and back to the great conversation. You ready? Knock and the door will be open to you. Seek and you shall find. Ask and it shall be given to you. And by the way, and if you do those things, all these things you need will be given to you. I'm a blessed man, Mike, because for most of my career, I think I had one addiction, year or two addiction. It was around me thinking, if I can make $1 million, I can then write my book. I can get out of the business world. And that's before I had a spiritual epiphany that I had been writing people's lives, that I had been given what I had been promised. My calling of writing is still there. It was just channeled differently. And I got through money. And once I got through money and I focused on calling, all these things were given unto me.
Sure.
And so the promise for this young man, you don't have to be scheming on the next step. Just stay true to your calling. So if you don't have that yet, we can work on that next.
That's brother, that is some awesome advice. Yeah, and I think, first of all, I think you have a book. You have a book, that you need to write. I'm telling you, the things that you are teaching and in terms of developing this next generation are things that they need to hear, right? Because there's too much in this world, as you know. It's a fallen world. We have a lot of people just thinking about me, and unfortunately, a lot of folks in quote leadership positions are the same way, and that doesn't mean they're bad people. It's just that a lot of times, as I found out, people get in positions of leadership not because they want to be leaders, not because they want to develop other people. It's because they're subject matter experts, they're the best engineer, they're the best spy, they're the best this. They get popped into this position. They don't have the temperament, nor do they have the mindset to learn to be a leader. They just give out orders and get the job done. And that's another reason why people leave. It's incumbent upon us, and I think you believe this, that if we're put in a leadership position, it's not about us first, right? It's about the people that you're taking care of. And I think everything you said is just spot on. Do you, when you look at this next gen that you've been mentoring, like this young man and others, are you hopeful for the ability of this next generation to rise up, not to do the job, of course they can do the job, but to actually take on the mantle of values-based, selfless leadership?
This is a podcast, so you didn't see me just take a big breath. I think one of the most perniciously evil thing that can be done to me is to take away my hope. Right? Hope is so important and so rare. I think, first of all, let's make sure our community listening to this is very clear. Leadership isn't titular. That is, it doesn't demand a title.
Yes.
Leadership is about influence. And we know every person will influence, for good or bad, others during their lives. They will. Mm-hmm. So we need to study the art of how we influence and where are we directing them to. If you just study leadership as a tool, you could end up with a Hitler, as this ex-CSO from AEP, by the way, on one of my last podcasts. He said that if you just study the tool, you can create a great leader, and you end up with a Hitler. And we've had those great leaders, those charismatic leaders, those behavioral leaders, whatever science they came from, who applied the science, became a great leader, but they didn't lead great lives.
Right.
Right. And so I say to you, Mike, see if it resonates with you. As long as there's one man, one woman with hope, faith, and the willingness to act, we can change the world. Yeah. Now, let me tell you one story. Kara, I hope you're listening. Kara was on a soccer team when my kids were, 7 years old. And I was named assistant coach, and I have no idea what soccer is, Mike. I'm a baseball guy, I'm a football guy, I'm a basketball, I'm a product of my generation. What the heck's soccer, right? But I've got a girls soccer team, and I'm assistant coach, and the coach was outstanding, by the way, but I hated being his assistant because Kara would just destroy practice every time. She just would mess around, she'd joke, she'd get the kids off target, and it was just like I hated it. And then one day the head coach catches a cold. Okay. And says, I'm going to run practice. And I'm going, I'm going to kill Kara. I'm going to kill Kara. I'm going to kill Kara. And and then I got this epiphany. So right before practice started, I see Kara. I walk up to her, pull her to the side, and I go, I don't know if you know this. You're the best leader on this team. And she was. She just was directing them in the wrong way. And I go, so I know nothing about soccer. I need you to run this practice. You lead them where you want to take them. I'll watch. She goes, I can't do that. And I go, why? You're the best leader on the team. She looks at me sheepishly and she goes, I don't think I'm a leader. I go, oh, you're leading them. Just, I ask you, where are you taking them? But you're going to lead this practice. Kara came up to me because the kids stayed in that same school all the way through high school, came up to me and she remembered that moment. She remembered that moment.
Wow.
And she has become an incredible leader, right? Right. But back to your core values, Mike, I'm so glad you brought them up. It's all about who are you? What's your identity? Why are you here? Who are you? And what do you leave behind, right?
That's in a nutshell. I'm going to steal that, by the way. You know,
well, you and I both know that we have an art of plagiarism. That's why we're in the business of leadership.
That's right. I got one last question.
Yeah.
And you have interviewed many leaders, wide variety of leaders, obviously, in your time. This may be a hard one or maybe not, but we'll see. I'll just throw it out.
Don't do it.
I know, don't do it. Is there one constant in all these leaders that you have been able to see, to kind of when you dissect their, everyone's got leadership styles. There's some commonality with these leaders that you consider what makes them great leaders. And it's unfair to say one because there's many, but
no, I think it's a wonderful question, Mike. It's a legitimate question. And it's so funny because you got me writing. And if they were watching video, I just went to my computer with all my notes going, I have the great Mike Howard on a podcast. I got to think through what I believe. So it was good. And I came across this quote. I'm actually as proud of the things we haven't done as the things I have done, because innovation is saying no to 1,000 things. Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
And Warren Buffett, believe it or not, says saying no is the secret to his success too. And I started thinking about that first time was this morning when I read that. And also Warren Buffett at the same time. And I started thinking about that. And I think the great Kavafi, a poet, wrote a poem called The Great Yes and the Great No. And he said, and he was trying to paint a picture of these series of inflection points and knowing full well, a no, you may never be able to come back. And a yes, you may never be able to come back. A great yes and a great no. Leaders, the greatest leaders I interviewed, not necessarily the wealthiest or most successful, are the ones who are laser focused on their thing, supported by their core values. Laser focused on their thing, supported by their core values. And those are the ones I think I see it over and over again in great leaders, just laser focused. Nothing's getting them off track, right?
Amen. I agree 100%. Working for Bill Gates when I first met him, you could just tell, they were just boom, right here. This is what they're going for. Perfect. Ron, first of all, thanks for taking the time out of your busy day to spend time with me and with the podcast audience. We're just growing our podcast, so I'm so honored that you, who have a very well-established podcast, would take the time to hang out with us. The other thing is, I'm serious, man. You know, right? You got to put pen to paper at some point, and you have to write your journey. I mean, the nuggets that I've gleaned, and I've known you for a long time. I've gleaned some great nuggets today, just in the short time we've talked. And you have a lot to give to the world. You're already giving, obviously, but you know, at someday I want to see Ron Worman. Want to see that book out. But you, we've had our own individual journey in terms of our friendship and where it is now and where it was, you know, when we first met. But what I want to leave the audience with is that what I started with. There are different ways to get to positions of leadership. Ron epitomizes to me the ability to take risks, as he did back in his youth, you know, but also understanding the environment around him, the world, that everyone doesn't think like him, like us, but also bringing values-based leadership into the business world. I think it's vitally important in today's world where you don't see a heck of a lot of value. So for that, I thank you, not just for the podcast, but for just living your values-based life and being an example to people like the young man you talked about, you're mentoring, and other people, so that they'll grow up to be good leaders as well. So I thank you for that.
Mike, I wish you the blessing of the legacy you're leaving, that it becomes apparent to you while you're still living. But even if it doesn't, you're changing people's lives. For those of you, I've known Mike for a long time, like he said. I won't mention any names, but I had the opportunity to sit with him in a foreign country just in the last 6 months with some friends of ours. And we were smoking cigars by a fire. And it was amazing to watch these men of stature lean forward on every word you were sharing with them. And I was thinking at the time, does he even know that he's now in the force multiplier stage of his career? You'll be touching people and you may never see the outcomes. So now the legacy you leave behind is one that's truly a gift to the world, because you may never take credit for it. That's pretty cool.
Amen. I agree, brother. Hey, thank you. Love to Sally. And let's do a Vesper happy hour virtually sometime soon.
As long as you invite that amazing partner of yours, Janice, with you, because she has been an incredible compass and ignition to your life, Mike. She's just been an amazing influence on you. Talk about leadership, right?
Exactly. In fact, I told her at one point, I'm going to get her on here. I'm going to interview her. You know, she said, I don't know. I said, you have a lot to teach people, right? I mean, you saved me from, you know, some bad times. So, but that's for another podcast. So, hey, thanks, brother. Appreciate you sharing your journey with us. Have a great weekend. And for all of you, again, check out the Great Conversation podcast with Ron Worman. Please hit the subscribe button for us, and we'll be back to you with the next podcast. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, Mike.